Welcome! This is a comprehensive guide about getting started with GitKraken and GitHub. In terms of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to focus on three major actions. So these are the major points we're going to hit. We're going to talk about authentication. So how do I communicate with my repos up on GitHub? After we talk about authentication, we'll then get into managing your remotes. So what are remotes? How do they even work? What's the idea behind them? And once we have a good idea of what remotes are and how they're related to our GitHub projects, we'll get into creating a pull request. How do I get the changes that I just made on my machine up on GitHub so other people can see what I'm doing, or so that someone else can review the changes I've made and possibly merge them into the main project? So first, a quick brush up on Git. So sometimes when I talk to folks, whether it be at conferences, I often hear folks conflate Git with GitHub, mostly because GitHub has become pretty ubiquitous in the space, right? Especially if you're someone who's newer to development, maybe your first school projects were always on GitHub, so whenever you hear Git, that's just the first thing your mind jumps to. While GitHub does depend on Git as a technology, Git is a separate program, right? So Git is a version control system. It is what we use to keep track of all the changes that have been made to files that exist in your project. And the reason why this is handy is because you really want to increase the probability that the changes you introduce to your source code are sound and don't introduce unexpected bugs. Bugs will invariably happen just because that's the nature of software, but there's definitely some things we can do to mitigate that. Just a shout out to those folks who are using Git for non-software projects. I do see a lot of grad students out there who are using it for science or for writing. I've even heard of lawyers using Git to track their documents. Because Git is just about tracking changes, different versions over time, there's definitely use cases that extend well beyond software. For today's video, we will just be focusing on a software example. We will also be focusing on the differences between working locally on your machine and the relationship between your local machine and your remote. For those of you who have heard the word remote but may be unsure about what it meant or what it means, a remote repository, which is just often shortened to remote, is a Git repository hosted on the internet or some other network. And in today's video, those remotes are going to be on GitHub. So cloning a remote, so when you perform that Git operation, creates a local version of that GitHub repository on your machine. So this is what gives you that sandbox to experiment, to make whatever changes you wish before you're ready to share that with other folks who have access to the main project on GitHub. Cloning also establishes a connection between the local repository on your machine and the remote repository up on GitHub, right? So this is what allows the push and pull actions with that remote project and a few other operations. So multiple clones of a single remote on GitHub can be created by other team members, right? So this is where people might first fork a repository up on GitHub and then clone their fork onto their local machine. That comes down to each project's preferences and how they prefer to set up their workflow. But this is what enables other people to collaborate on the same project efficiently and with less risk to the source code. So how does this all set up? How does this work with GitKraken? How can I use GitKraken to make my life easier when I'm working with projects that exist on GitHub? So here you see the GitKraken UI, and you're immediately greeted with the sign-in option. And this is one of the first points of integration that we have with GitHub, in that you have the option to sign in or create an account really using your GitHub credentials. This is the same as perhaps like signing in with a Google account. So that's the case here with GitHub, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click to sign in with GitHub, and I'm going to sign in using GitKraken. So I'm already signed in to GitHub, so let me switch tabs and you'll see. I'm already signed in to GitHub under GitKraken. This is the account that I'll be using for today's example. And I just received the success page, so if I go back to GitKraken, my screen just changed. It's asking me to set up a profile. And profile is actually really handy. So this is available through GitKraken Pro. You can sign commits as different email addresses. The most common use case I see is that you might have a profile for work and another one for personal. I've even seen folks who just have multiple work profiles just because they work on different teams. What I like to do when I set up a profile is our profiles are actually linked to Gravatar. So if you have a Gravatar account, we will automatically detect any image that you have associated to that email address. So in this case, I have this Keith image already set up on Gravatar. It's tied to the keith@gitkraken.com email address. Let me provide a name, and then I'm ready to go. So this will be the profile that I will use. You'll see it here in the upper right corner in a minute once I clone my first repository. But there's a few things that I want to do next. So because all of my projects are up on GitHub, I want to set up my integration with GitHub within GitKraken. And the way you do that from this screen is you go to the Preferences option under Customize. From here, we're going to jump to the Authentication tab. So there's lots of settings here on the left side that you can go through. You can revisit the profile you just created. Here's where you see that image that I had picked, or the image that was generated based off the email address that I had set, just because it's using Gravatar. There's also some other general settings that you can go through, some UI preferences. You can set up GPG, which is one of those bonus features if you are someone who signs your commits. This is the place to set up GPG. It does require that you first have GPG installed on your machine, just a heads up. If it's already installed on your machine, it should work automatically. And if you have questions about this, we do have some documentation on our support docs that go into this a little bit more. But moving forward, let's go back to this Authentication tab. So if you're someone who uses not only GitHub, but any one of these options here, you can set up integrations with each of these. So in my case, I'm interested in setting up my github.com integration. So here's how it works. I'm going to hit disconnect just because I had previously connected. Disconnect. So this is what you will see when you go here for the first time. You'll have the option to connect to GitHub. And make a click, it'll make an API call to your github.com account. And because I'm already signed in as GitKraken, I'm immediately jumped to just the authorization section. If you're not logged in, you'll just be prompted to log into the correct GitHub account. So I'm going to continue the authorization. I get a success page. So now when I return to GitKraken, I have a green toast message waiting for me. Say, hey, you've successfully connected to GitHub. And next, I can set up my SSH key. You want to make sure the actions that you perform between your local repository and GitHub are secure. You know, your push and pull. You want to make sure that all that data that's transmitted over the internet is secure. HTTPS is one way to encrypt that, and that is just done automatically if you clone using an HTTPS URL. And the thing to know about SSH is that it's a network protocol that allows one computer to connect to another computer over an unsecured network like the internet, right? So without encryption, data travels over the web in plain text, which makes it easy. There's methods to intercept username, login credentials, and someone could use that. However, SSH is one way to encrypt that data, and this allows you to securely log into a remote machine, to securely transmit files, or safely issue remote commands to GitHub, for example, and much more. So the thing to know about SSH is that it's commonly implemented using something called the client-server model. So one computer is called the SSH client, and the other one is called the SSH server. And because this is a GitHub video, the SSH server corresponds to GitHub, and the SSH client will be your machine. SSH is then set up using a pair of keys. So the public key is stored on the SSH server, so in this case GitHub, and the private key is locally stored on the SSH client. So your machine has the SSH client. It makes contact with the SSH server, so in this case GitHub, and it provides the ID of the key pair it wants to use to prove its identity. GitHub, acting as the SSH server, then creates a challenge which is encrypted by the public key and sent back to you, the client. So it's sent to your computer. You as a client then take the challenge, your machine will decrypt it using your private key, and then send the original challenge back to the SSH server, so in this case GitHub. And once this negotiation is complete, which happens in seconds by the way, the connection is established and you can get to work. So all that means is, going back to GitKraken here, When I click this green button to generate SSH keys and add to GitHub, there's a lot of things happening all at once. Before this button existed, you had to create an SSH key manually. And there's like, if you even just Google it, you'll see the number of steps that you have to go through to create your own SSH key. And you can do that. But if you're looking to save some time, you can just hit this green button to generate SSH key and add them to GitHub. So what we've done is we've not only created the SSH key, but we've added the key pair that corresponds to GitHub, acting as this SSH server. We've added it to GitHub for you. So now we've just established that tunnel where we can tell GitHub, hey, I wish to push to this remote. Hey, I wish to pull from this remote, right? Those actions are now possible because we've set up that integration. For today's example, we're going to clone a repository. So because I've set up the integration, I now can click this option, clone. You could always hit this option to clone, but normally what you would have to do is you would then just have to give GitKraken the clone URL. So let me go to GitHub. So here we go, the clone or download. GitHub gives you the option to get the SSH or HTTPS URLs from the repo's main page. And you can copy this and then paste it into GitKraken to clone the repository. So I'm not going to complete this operation just because there is a more convenient way of doing this since I've set up the integration with GitHub. So I just click the github.com tab, and I am presented with all the repositories that I have access to on GitHub, right? So this is the organization that I belong to. I have access to some repos there. And these are some other repos that I have under my GitKraken account. And the one that I'll be using for today's example is Journal of the Wills, which should be a familiar and hopefully fun example for you to follow along. So all I do is click that option. It's telling me, hey, this is the path that I'm going to use to create it, but I need to make sure I browse for the path that I have in mind. I want to place it under sites, so that's where I will place it. Let's go ahead and open it, and we're going to clone this repository. Okay. So once you clone it, you'll be presented with the option to open it, and aha, here it is. Just a few commits. Let me zoom up a little bit for you. Okay, so when you open it, you can do this to any repository, right? The moment you set up the integration, you can click to open any repo that you have up on GitHub just by going to the clone. So I hit File in the upper left corner, go to Clone, github.com. Here they all are, right? So, and you can do this for all of them, right? So for example, so here's the support documentation. Actually, this is already cloned onto my local machine. If you already have repos on your machine, or you've already cloned it, maybe you've done this ahead of time using the command line, or this is your first time using GitKraken, you would just browse to wherever you have the repo hosted, right? So in my case, I have, say, the support documentation is under my sites folder. So I'm going to click open, and it's going to pull up this entire repository, and I can see all the history. So this is more a robust repo here where I've actually done a lot of work with my team on this one. So you can open any repo and immediately get a whole bunch of information just by looking at the graph. So that's a quick glimpse into it. I'm going to close out, and as you can see here, we open the repo in a new tab. That's a newer feature of GitKraken, or a useful feature at this point, where you can click to create a new tab, and you can switch between different tabs, just to kind of switch context here. We also have one for release notes. So I've jumped ahead a little bit there. I just wanted to show that to you in case, the moment you see this, you want to jump and run with it and you want to try some things that you have in mind. But for the sake of this example, let's continue on. So what I'm going to do next here is I'm going to perform a series of actions that should help us understand some of the actions that happen between GitKraken and GitHub. So how can I change my files, and how can I get those changes up to GitHub? How can I ask someone else to review the changes that I made? So that's for a pull request. So I'm going to help answer those couple questions with this example here, Journal of the Wills. I have this commit selected. This is where my master branch is pointing to. So this is where you'll see all the branches here on the left side. A branch is just a pointer to a commit. Just keep that in mind. And master happens to be pointing to this commit, change format to markdown, which has a commit ID of 40C2AB, or at least that's part of it, right? It's actually a much longer string when you copy and paste it. And I'm going to click to view all files, mostly because I'm interested in seeing all the files that are in this repo. And it's not that many, it's just a few. But you should, when I click it, you should be able to see some familiar, if you're into Star Wars, some familiar text here. So I have a series of scenes from the movie that I'll be using for my examples today. And one of the first things that I want to show you is that GitKraken does have a file editor inside of it. So if you wish to make changes from within GitKraken, you can definitely do that instead of opening your favorite code editor. If you want to open your code editor, that's fine too. I'm just going to stick to GitKraken's code editor since it's more convenient for the example I'm doing today. So the first example that I want to do is I'm just going to make a simple change. So what I've done here, just to kind of show you once again, I am looking for the opening crawl markdown file. So there's a number of ways to get to that file. I happen to click on a commit. In this case, it's one of the files that was renamed. So I can just quickly click opening crawl, and then click edit this file to make changes. I'm not going to save these changes though, just because I want to show you a few more things. Don't save just yet. We'll get to that part. But say you don't remember which commit had the file, and you could always do the view all files in case you want to do opening crawl. That's another way to do it. But the other way to do it is just to use our fuzzy finder. So I just hit Command/ right here, or it might be Control/ for you, to pull up the keyboard shortcuts list. And the one that I'm looking for is the fuzzy finder. So the fuzzy finder is right here, and it's available through Command or Control P. So again, Command or Control P will pull up this search bar. And you can type the name of a file. Oops, let's do opening crawl, that's what it's called. Open file is what I want, and then opening, there we go, opening crawl.md. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to update the opening crawl. This does not have the episode number, so I'm going to say episode 4, A New Hope. All right, and I'm going to hit Command S to save. So the moment I hit save, Command S for save, that file was added to staging. So it is now in the unstaging section, and it's available for me to add it to the staging section. And once I add it to staging, I can then commit it. So let's see that in action. So I'm going to hit X. So the moment you make any changes to your repository, you will get a whip node in GitKraken. So for comparison's sake, this is what GitKraken shows on the right-hand side when you click a commit. When you click a commit, you will be viewing all of the file changes that were made. And in this case, 3 files were added, 1 was deleted, and 3 were renamed. So the file name itself was renamed to something else. But in this case, we have a different color. We have this yellow icon that shows a file was modified. And when you click on the file itself, we will show you what was modified. So this is the diff. And when viewing the diff, you have multiple ways of viewing how something was changed, right? Here we have what we call hunk view. That's the first thing that we give you by default. But you also have inline view in case you wish to see your change in the context of the entire file. Maybe it matters where in the file this change was made for your brain to get a handle on what it means. And then we also have something called split view. So split view, let me see if I can zoom out a little bit just to kind of give you more real estate. So split view will give you an idea of how things look before and after. So in my case, before there was nothing, now there's a new hope. So there's multiple ways of slicing the diff so that you get the information that you need to make sense of what was changed. So as you make various changes, those changes will appear here on the right-hand side of the commit panel. And I'm going to make one more change just to emphasize that point. And this one involves going to the final scene.markdown file. So let's do Command or Control P again for the fuzzy finder. And I'm going to open a file. And this one is called the final scene. So I'll just search final.md. There it is. Okay, so I clicked the file. It quickly opened it for me. And what I'm going to do is there is a section where Chewie receives a medal around his neck. his neck. Sorry. So I'm going to delete that and say Chewbacca growls and R2 beeps with happiness. Boom. Let's make that change. So I hit Command S, and the moment I save the file, I am then returned back to the whip node here. And here I see in the final scene the diff. So this time I have red text, right? Or not only are the lines that were affected highlighted in red, the words that were actually changed are also highlighted. So this is we're word diffing here. So lastly, the princess placed a medallion around. That was removed. I left the name Chewbacca in that line, and I removed next and he's so happy, right? And I added a new line, Chewbacca, a new word really, Chewbacca growls. So all of that is represented in the diff. Very nice. And so if I'm ready to commit these changes, I can then stage these changes. So for example, in the opening crawl, I can just hit stage this file. But in the final scene, I do want to emphasize that you have the option to stage certain lines only if you wanted to. So if you only wanted to stage that line, you could, right? Maybe I decided that I do want to keep this line. In my case, that makes no sense. I'm not going to do that. I'll just stage everything that I modified. And then once a file is in staging, you can click on the diff to view what was changed again, right? So you can always review what's unstaged versus what's in staging. And if you're happy with what's in staging, this is the moment where you can create your commit message. So in this case, we did opening crawl. So rename the movie and update ending. So just type a useful commit message. You can also type a description out. Advanced tip here, if you wanted to set a commit message template, you can do that from preferences. I'll let you search and find that for yourself. Oops. Oh, and GPG binary not found. So I don't have GPG set up on my account, which is why I received that message. So let me just do one quick thing over here. And I don't want to use GPG. I don't have that set up yet on this user. So let's commit those changes. Okay, there we go. So I've just committed the change as GitKraken. You'll notice that my key symbol shows who the author is. It's me as GitKraken. And when I click on the commit, I see that the final scene markdown file was modified, as was the opening crawl markdown file. So this is just us working locally on our machine. We've only done things locally. None of this exists up on GitHub. And just to emphasize the point, let's look at these files up on GitHub. So first is the opening crawl. So I just went to the repo code tab, and as you can see here, there is no name. A New Hope does not exist. And same idea with the opening or with the final scene. I'm not going to show that just to save a little bit of time. And a few other things are occurring here as well. So when I made that commit, the master branch with this computer icon moved ahead of another master branch with the GitKraken icon. What's going on here? So the change that I just made to these two files only exists on local, as I was saying earlier. And we show that by using this computer icon. So we'll draw the branch for you, and we'll show you where it exists. This GitKraken icon is the icon I'm using for my GitHub account. So my GitHub account up here is using, hopefully you can see it up here, this Keef icon. So that's what I'm using to represent my remote. So my local is ahead of my master branch by one commit. And so that's why I see this one arrow symbol next to my local. So because I've set up the SSH connection with my repository, that's how I was able to clone the repo in the first place. But I'm using that same SSH tunnel to perform push operations. So to get this change from local up onto GitHub, all I need to do is hit push. So the moment I do that, the changes that I just made on my local machine will now appear on github.com. So let's take a look. Let's do a quick refresh just to give GitHub a chance to catch up. And here it is. Here's that change I made. Episode 4, A New Hope, now appears on the code tab for the opening_crawl.md file. And just to go back a little bit further, let's also look at the final scene. So the final scene should have also been updated to show that Chewbacca growls, right? Instead of receiving a medal, we've simplified his scene so that he just growls and R2 beeps. So all of the changes that I made locally are now up on GitHub. Anyone who has access to the repo up on GitHub will also be able to see those changes that I've made. So that's how we can get changes that were made to your machine up someplace where other people can review it or collaborate along with you. That's the power of GitHub, and GitKraken just makes that so much easier to understand, just because we give you a visual way of interpreting what's going on. So just to recap a little bit here, so GitHub is the remote. It exists up in the internet, and we're able to pull down, because we've established a connection between our local machine and GitHub, we're able to perform actions like cloning down a repo, fetching changes that were made to an existing repository we already have cloned, or pulling changes. The inverse of that, of course, is that any changes that we have on our local machine can be pushed up to GitHub so that we can have other folks take a look or review our changes. But what if I make a mistake? So what do you do if you made a commit that you didn't quite mean to do? How do you go back in time, so to speak? So there's multiple ways to do that in Git. I'll show you the first line of defense that you have. Let's create a change that will be our quote-unquote mistake. And this one will occur in the garbage masher scene. So again, I'm going to do Command P. I'm going to search for the open file command, and we're going to do garbage masher. Okay, so I hit enter and it pulled up the garbage masher scene.markdown file. And what I want to do is there's a section where there is an explosion. So let's search for the word explosion. So I just did a Command F, and there it is. Okay, suddenly there's a great explosion and the door of the control tower flies. Okay, so let's take out that explosion, and one stormtrooper bonks their head. Okay, Command S to save. All right, so that change is now ready in my unstaged file section. So here in the whip node, I can see the garbage masher markdown file was edited. These lines were affected. This text was removed. This text was added in line 33. So I'm going to stage the whole hunk. So this is the hunk. Obviously, when you're heavily editing your own files, you may have multiple hunks, and you'll see them threaded here in the diff view. And you'll be able to stage or unstage different hunks as you go through them in the diff. So in my case, I'm just going to stage the whole hunk, which is equivalent to staging the file in my example. And let's say Stormtrooper bonks head. So that's the mistake here. So let's fast forward. Okay, a period of time has passed. I now realize that was a mistake. I should not have had that Stormtrooper bonk his head in that commit. How do I undo that change? So I mean, I ask you, how would you do that right now in the command line? How would you go through and undo and revert? Would you revert that commit in the command line? Do you have an idea of how you would do that in maybe some other tool? Regardless of what the answer to that might be, there is an undo option available in GitKraken, which just makes life so much easier. So in this case, because this change is local, it's even easier to undo things. So I can just hit the undo button, and that commit was undone. And so I can quickly jump to my whip node, see that, okay, it's now back in staging. If I want to, I can go back and edit this file and take out that line where it says Stormtrooper bonks their head. By the way, if you do go to the movie, and if you do watch the movie and you look for this scene, you will see that the Stormtrooper bonked their head. So that actually made it to the script. That actually made it to production. Funny enough. It's easy to miss though. But okay, I've updated that scene so it no longer has that bonking of the head. Oh, here it is at the top. So this is the file that I meant to click on. So this is where I take out that line, right? So you need to stage that line to have it included. So now it's all put together. So this file was edited in this way. Remember, each change that you made, it's just addition. Even if you remove something, it just adds that removal. So when you stage a file that has multiple changes to it, it just adds all the changes together. Okay, so remove mistake is the commit message. So now I can commit it. And once again, you'll see that the commit is here locally. The repo up on GitHub does not have this change. So all I need to do to get this change up onto GitHub is push. Okay, so next I want to simulate as though someone has pushed a change to the repository up on GitHub. So to do that, I'm just going to go to GitHub directly, and I'm just going to make a change to one of these files. So let's take a look here, the Cantina scene. And I'm going to be a little less creative, but this is a change I made on GitHub, just to be very explicit on what's going on there. Whoa. Okay, the save button is down here. Or I have to commit the changes. Okay. Change from GitHub. Here we go. I'm not used to using GitHub to commit things, but it's nice that they have that option. Okay, so now when I go back to GitKraken, I can hit fetch just to ask GitKraken to check to see if there's anything pending up on GitHub, and there is. So you'll see the master branch with the GitKraken icon is now ahead of the master branch with the local icon. So that means that there's a change pending, possibly more than one, depending on the number you see here. And as you may have already guessed, you would just hit the pull icon to get that change into your local repository. So to get that change down from GitHub, we'll just hit the pull icon, and there we go. Now the master branch has both the local icon, the machine here, and my remote icon. If you know that someone has just pushed a change to the repository and you want that change local, you would just perform a fetch to check, and then you can pull those changes down. So this entire time, we have been making changes directly to master. And if this is just a project that you're working on, that's okay. That should be fine. But what if this is, a repository that has multiple collaborators or even just more than one collaborator? Making changes directly to master might not be the way that you want to go. Maybe you want to have feature branches and introduce an additional layer of review just to make sure that anything that gets merged into master is good or has a higher probability of not introducing problems for you. Typically, to create a branch in the command line, you would have to type a specific command and then the name of the branch, and you have to know which commit you want to create the branch off of. So you need the commit ID. There's just a lot that could go into it. So the way you would do it in GitKraken, though, is really just pick any commit that you wish to create the branch off of, and you can right-click to create the branch. You do have a branch icon that will create a branch off of the currently selected commit. So in my case, that is where I want to create my branch. In this case, is off of the same commit that master is pointing to. But I do want to emphasize that if you want to go back in time, quote unquote, so if you even want to just check out a branch or really check out a commit, the way you would do it in GitKraken is that you just create a temporary branch. Let's do that real quick. Let's just hit temp. So if you wanted to just look at how things were back at this point in time, you can create a branch to check out that commit, or check out that branch which is pointing to that commit, and then click to review the diff. So that's one way you can go back in time and see what was changed or how it was changed. I guess the reason I would do this is that I run a local version of my website. So if I'm working on support documentation, I actually have a Python script that runs a local version of my website in a Chrome browser, right? So by checking out that branch, I can tell my machine to build the website based off the changes that are on this commit. So if you wanted to look at a website as it existed in the past, in my case, I would just create a branch, check that out, and that's how my script would know to build off of that. That may or may not be applicable to some of you, but I just want to throw out my example, my use case, in case that resonates with anyone there. One quick pro tip: you will never be able to delete any branch that you currently have checked out. So this happens to you, just check out another branch and then delete the other branch. Ta-da! Okay, let's go back to our branching example. So I want to create a director's cut. So I'm going to create a branch. So I can either right-click on the commits I have in mind, or in this case I can hit the branch icon since it's pointing, since it will create the branch off of the target commit. And let's call this director's cut. Oh, so you won't be able to do apostrophes in GitKraken, but you can do dashes, and you can't do spaces either. So just a heads up, just the way that our code handles branch names there. So in this director cut, I want to make it so that Han does not shoot first in the cantina scene. So we're going to return to the cantina scene, which is right here. And first of all, you may notice that we have a way to quickly jump around the file just by this file minimap right here. And what we're going to do is we're going to take out this scene where Han shoots first. Take out this line. So we're going to remove that part where Han shot first. If I exit out, I'll see the whip node is right here. And the director cut branch is still collinear with the master branch, right? They're all still pointing to the same branch. But watch. Let me stage these changes. Han does not shoot first. I'm going to commit the change, and aha! So the moment I make that change, my director cut branch is now points to that commit, right? And this is what I would expect, right? Because branches are just pointers to commits, as you make more commits for whatever branch is checked out, you'll see that branch pointer move along with the commits that you make. So that's why the director cut separated from the master. I want someone to look at this branch and just kind of give me their thoughts on whether it's ready to be merged into the master branch. So how do I get someone else to review this for me? So this is where we get into the idea of a pull request. So a pull request, which is also known as a merge request, it's an event where you as a contributor ask a repo maintainer to review code that you wish to merge into the project. Pull requests are not necessarily a core Git operation. They are common collaboration features of Git hosting services like GitHub. So that's one of the key things that makes GitHub so useful, and or other services similar to it. And GitKraken makes it much easier to make that pull request in the first place. So to make a pull request in GitKraken, you really can just drag and drop the branch you want to merge onto the target branch. So you do have the option to merge, which you can do. If you're someone who has, first of all, if you have the permissions to perform a merge, it really just depends on, is this a project just for you? Are you working with other people? Are your permissions locked down? Depending on the answer to that question, you may or may not have the ability to just merge and push. And maybe you don't want to just merge and push if you do want another human being to look at your code, to look at your changes, and make sure everything is okay. So that's where this last option here, the push and start pull request, will come in handy. So the reason why it's both push and start is because right now this director cut branch only exists locally on my machine. So before I can even start a pull request up on GitHub, this branch must first exist on GitHub. So that's where the push operation comes into play. After I perform that push operation, that's where I can tell GitHub to create a pull request to compare the two branches. So all of this is just GitKraken performing a number of API calls on your behalf, all because you performed a drag and drop. So I'm going to click the option. First, when it asks you to push, it's going to say, which remote do you want me to push it to, right? So in my case, it's just GitKraken over here. You might have more than one, just depending on other projects you might be working on. But in my case, origin corresponds to this repo here that I have on github.com that I've been using for the duration of this video. So let's hit submit. So first, that branch gets pushed up. I know it's complete because I see the GitKraken icon in the branch. And then, of course, the pull request modal comes out where I can fill in additional information. But just before I do that, now if I go to, let's go to the branch, let's go to the code here. So under the code tab, I can of course now create a pull request here as well, but you'll see under the branches I now have a director cut branch where it didn't exist before. Okay, so let's finish the thought here in GitKraken. So we will when you drag and drop, we will pre-populate which repo, which branch you're coming from and where you want to go to, right? So we're coming from director cut, we want to merge it into master. This is the title of my PR. If you want to add additional bullets, you want to add additional description, whatever practice you have in place, you can go ahead and build that all out here. And another bonus tip here as well, if you have pull request templates set up through your GitHub account, GitKraken has the ability to detect that pull request template and pre-populate that in this modal. It just depends on, you just need to make sure the repo that you are creating the pull request against has that configured. Again, if you want to learn more, just look for that in our support documentation. In any case, I also want to highlight the ability, GitHub has the option to add reviewers. So if you wanted to add reviewers, these are other people who have access to the project. So in this case, I have 2 other folks. I'm going to add Gourmet Keef as an additional reviewer. And you can also add assignees. So in my case, I'll assign it to myself just for this example. And you also have the ability to add labels. So is this a bug? Is this an enhancement? I'm going to call this an enhancement, a feature branch, if you will, and create the pull request. So once I create the pull request, it will create that on GitHub, so I can view it directly. We'll give you an option to view it directly on GitHub. I already have GitHub open, so if I go to the pull request tab now, it will change from a 0 to a 1, and I can review the pull request here in GitHub and take advantage of the commenting system. All the features that you may be used to already with the pull request section of GitHub are now available to you. So if I, as the reviewer, take a look at this and I approve it, and I have the ability to merge, I can go ahead and perform the merge right here in GitHub. So I'm going to confirm the merge. Before I do that, just to show you what it looks like in GitKraken, here's what it looks like before I perform any merge and approve the pull request. You'll see that there's a pull request icon in line with my computer and Keef icons, so my remote and local icons, I should say. And I can always right-click on any pull request branch and view it on GitHub. So that's a quick tip. So not only do we give you the option here at first, but you also have the option when you right-click on any branch. And we also show you the pull request here in the left panel. If I hover over it, I can see the status of my reviews. So right now, Gourmet Keep doesn't really have a review yet, but the moment that Gourmet Keep does perform the review, if it's approved, this icon will change to green. If it is anything else, you'll see a different color, orange or red. And in addition to that, if you have integrations with Jenkins, Travis CI, any continuous integrations tool set up, we'll show you the build status of any of those for you. So it won't be, I don't have it here set up, but just keep in mind if that is something that you do have configured, you can get a quick peek into how that looks. It'll be a check mark or an X, depending on whether the build was successful or if it failed. Okay, so I'm ready to merge this. Let's merge it in. So again, what's happening here is this branch director cut, the changes are being merged into master. So it's just a request to perform a merge. Like, hey, I want to perform this merge, but someone please look at it. So now when I perform a fetch, oh, I don't even need to, GitKraken detected it. Now when I perform a fetch, I will see that the merge went through, someone reviewed it, and all the changes that I made here on the director cut branch are now in master. The way I know is I can click on the master node here and see the Cantina scene, and that there's no gun, only Java, right? So there it is. And then just to make this official, I can update my local version, because right now my local does have the Han shot first section. So to update that so that it's concurrent with what I have up on GitHub, I'll perform another pull. Oh, first I need to check out master, so double click master here on the left hand side. Then I can perform a pull. Okay, there we go. So master has been updated. Now when I click on the Cantina scene, let me click on this commit, here we go. Now when I click on the Cantina scene, you'll see that that has been removed. So that's how you can compare, by the way. So in this commit, that was removed, but in this commit, I can see that it was still there. So that's how you can still review changes that were made over time. This is definitely a point I keep hitting on just because it is useful and valuable. Okay, not too bad, right? So we've talked about setting up the GitHub integration, which you can do from your preferences here on the left in the upper right corner. And you can set up the authentication with GitHub and also GitHub Enterprise if that's something that you use as well. We've talked about remotes and what they are in relation to GitHub and your local machine. So we understand now that the remote's here on the left-hand side. One additional thing that I'll say about remotes is that you do have the option to add additional remotes using this plus icon here in the left-hand panel. So my GitHub account and all its branches are shown here on the left-hand side. And actually, if I go in here, GitHub gives me this option every time I merge a pull request to delete that branch. If I click delete, so that branch has been deleted, and let me do a quick fetch, you will see that director cut branch disappear. So it is now no longer under my remote, just because you see here that when it checks the remote, there is no director cut branch any longer. But say I wanted to add an additional remote, right? So because I have the integration set up, I do have access to anyone else who has forked this repository. So in my case, I forked the repository under my own GitHub account, and I can add myself as an additional remote. So I can see where my remote branch is. So me, as a contributor, I don't have any of these changes yet. So I'll have to perform a few updates on my own repo. If I were to be using GitKraken, I would just perform a pull to update my master so that it has all of these additional changes. But that's how you can add, if you want to see where your team members are with their work, adding their remote is a really good way of doing that, because you'll see the other branches that they've created or where some key branches are in the timeline. And then I've also shown you how to create pull requests, right? So GitKraken makes it really easy to drag and drop and create a pull request. And like remotes, you also have the option just to click the plus icon from the left-hand panel to create a pull request. And here's where you just manually fill out the form. One final thing, I know that we also talked about these three main things, but as a bonus feature, I do want to say that if you click the new tab view, or if you click just to open a new tab, you do have an additional option here to open a Glow board. So I'm going to click Open Glow. And Glow is a task tracking tool. So if you wanted to use it to track the work that you're doing, it's definitely a great and easy way of keeping track of who's doing what. But there's an additional feature I want to show off, and it's GitHub Sync. Glow has the ability to sync with your GitHub issues. And this repository actually does have some issues associated to it. So I'm going to click down here in the bottom left corner. I do have the Connect to GitHub option. I'm going to connect to GitHub. I'm going to authorize Glow. GitKraken Glow wishes to make API calls to your GitHub issues. Is that okay? Yes, that's okay. You can go ahead and allow it to do that. All right, success. So the integration has been set up. Now when I go to Glow, I have the option to create a synced board. So from this drop-down menu, I can now connect to any of the repositories I have up on my GitHub account. And in my case, I wish to create a synced board with this repository that we've been using throughout this entire example. So I've connected my GitHub account. So I've connected Glow to my GitHub issues. And these are all the issues that I have up on that repository. Just to prove it to you, let's go up on GitHub. And under issues, we have 7 issues, right? And these are all the issues. These are all the issues. They all match one for one. And any change you make to this file, let's say Vader. So instead of Yoda, I want to say Vader. Let's save that change. So boom, now this says Vader instead of Yoda. And that was no editing here, no video magic there. That was instant. That's how fast the process works. Now the reason why this might be useful to you is GitHub issues exists as just this one list. But, you know, especially me, I'm a little bit more visual. Maybe I want to do an in progress tab, and then maybe I want to do a done tab. And I actually want to add an emoji. Let's do this one. Okay, that's just more visual for me. So when I do that, and I'm going to collapse my boards. So now I can move things along. For example, I just finished rescinding Chewy's medal, so that is done. And I can go through and add details to each of these cards, where you can go through and type out, what's been going on, or where you can go ahead and type out the description for the work that is to be done. So it's definitely something I encourage you to take a look at, especially if your GitHub repo does have issues. If you want to arrange that into a workflow that makes sense to you, that's definitely one way that you can save some time and make better sense of the issues that you're working through. All right, so hopefully you have a better idea of how to get started with GitKraken and GitHub. GitHub has a great API, so we've been able to really build out the integration between these two tools. There's way more that you can do. If you have questions about it, feel free to check out our support documentation. If you want to see similar content, feel free to drop us a comment. We'd be happy to see what we can do there too. All right, thanks for watching. We'll see you all next time.